There's a man in your city who makes $900,000 a year. Another man makes $90,000. Your brain just processed those two numbers as basically the same thing. They're not. One of them makes 10 times more than the other. But if I asked you to picture the difference in their lives, the gap in their bank accounts, the weight of their financial security, you can't. Not really. You think you can, but you can't. And that's not because you're bad at math. It's because your brain wasn't built for this. It was built to count berries, to track small groups of animals, to notice when 3 people left the cave and only 2 came back. Your brain is a machine optimized for numbers it can see, touch, and survive with. Everything beyond that, it's theater. And right now, in 26, that little design flaw is costing you everything. Let me show you what I mean. Think about the last time someone told you the national debt was $36 trillion. Did that number mean anything to you? Did you feel 36 trillion? Could you picture it, hold it, compare it to anything in your life? Probably not. Now think about the last time you hesitated before spending $12 on lunch. You felt that one, didn't you? $12 has weight. It connects to something real. You can imagine the sandwich, the cash leaving your hand, the slight guilt, the small permission you gave yourself. But 36 trillion? That's just a sound your mouth makes. This isn't a quirk. It's not a minor bug in your software. It's the central operating problem of modern life. Because every major decision you make, every opinion you hold, every vote you cast, every financial move you consider, it all runs through a piece of hardware that maxes out somewhere around $10,000. After that, you're guessing. And the people who understand this, who've learned to exploit it, they've built entire systems around your blindness. Let's start with something simple. Close your eyes. Picture 3 apples. You saw them instantly, didn't you? 3 distinct objects sitting there in your mind. You didn't count them. You didn't think 1, 2, 3. You just knew. Now picture 7 apples. Harder. You probably had to count. Maybe you grouped them. 3 here, 4 there. Your brain needed a system. Now picture 43 apples. You can't. Not really. You might see a pile, a vague crowd of apples, but you're not seeing 43 distinct objects. You're approximating. You're using language and memory to hold the idea of 43, but you're not experiencing it. This is called subitizing. It's the ability to instantly perceive small quantities without counting. And for most people, it tops out around 4 or 5. Everything after that is learned behavior, symbolic thinking, abstract processing. In other words, past 5, you're not seeing numbers anymore. You're reading them. And here's the thing, when you read a number, when you process it as a symbol, you lose the emotional weight. You lose the visceral understanding. It becomes information without feeling, which is fine when you're doing your taxes or calculating a tip. But it's a disaster when you're trying to understand wealth, debt, risk, or power. Your brain doesn't process numbers linearly. It processes them logarithmically. That's a fancy way of saying your brain cares more about the difference between 1 and 10 than it does about the difference between 90 and 100. Think about it like this. If you have $1 and I give you 10 more dollars, your wealth multiplied by 11. That feels massive, life-changing, depending on your situation. But if you have $90 and I give you 10 more, you barely notice. Your wealth increased by about 11%. Nice, but not transformative. Same $10. Totally different emotional weight. Now, scale that up. If you make $50,000 a year and someone offers you a job making $60,000, that's a big deal. That's a 20% raise. That's a new life. But if you make $5 million a year and someone offers you $5 million and $100,000, you wouldn't even take the meeting. The difference between $50,000 and $60,000 feels huge. The difference between $5 million and $5,100,000 feels like nothing. But mathematically, that second gap is 10 times larger. Your brain just can't see it. Let's try something. Imagine you're walking. Every step you take represents $1,000. You want to walk from $0 to $1 million. How far do you think you'd have to walk? 1,000 steps, about half a mile. 15 minutes at a normal pace. You could do it on your lunch break. Now, you want to walk from $0 to $1 billion. How far now? 621 miles. That's New York to Chicago. That's a 2-week walk if you never stop moving. And you want to walk to 1 trillion? 621,000 miles. That's 25 trips around the Earth. At 1 step per second, never sleeping, never stopping, it would take you 31,000 years. But when you hear millionaire and billionaire, your brain treats them like neighbors on the same street. It doesn't. They're not even in the same universe. Here's where it gets personal. You know that feeling when you hear about someone making $200K a year, and you think, that's rich. That's comfortable. That's made it. It is comfortable. In most places, that's a genuinely good life. But let me put it differently. If you make $200,000 a year and you save every single penny, pay no taxes, spend nothing on food, rent, or survival, it would take you 5,000 years to become a billionaire. 5,000 years. That's longer than recorded human history. You'd have to start saving in 3000 BC, before the pyramids, before writing, before the wheel, and you'd finish now. But your brain doesn't see that. When you hear millionaire and billionaire, the difference feels like a few steps up the ladder. It's not a ladder. It's a canyon. And the people on the other side of that canyon, they know you can't see it. Turn on the news, read any headline about government spending. Congress approves $2 billion infrastructure package. Pentagon budget increases by $15 billion. Tech company reports $8 billion in revenue. Your brain processes all those numbers the same way. Big, really big. Huge maybe, but the difference between $2 billion and $15 billion is $13 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's the GDP of some countries. But it feels like nothing to you, because both numbers are past your threshold. Both are in the incomprehensibly large bucket. So when a politician says we need to cut $2 million from a school budget to save money, and then approves $800 million for a weapons contract, your brain sees those as equivalent categories of decision-making. One is a rounding error. One is an entire system, but you can't feel the difference, so you don't react to it. And they know that. Let's bring this home. Literally. You're looking at houses. One costs $300K, another costs $600,000. You see them as two different worlds, right? One is affordable but a stretch. The other is completely out of reach. And for your life, for your budget, that's true. But now, imagine you're someone with $50 million in assets. The difference between a $300,000 house and a $600,000 house is the same as the difference between a $12 sandwich and a $24 sandwich. It's nothing. But your brain doesn't know that, because your brain can't process 50 million. It certainly can't compare 50 million to 300,000 in any meaningful way. So when people talk about the housing crisis, and someone says, why don't rich people just buy fewer investment properties, they're imagining someone choosing between two houses. They're not. They're choosing between wallpaper patterns. The amounts are so small relative to their wealth that the decision has no emotional weight whatsoever. And you can't see that, because you're not wired to. Let's talk about the national debt for a second. $36 trillion. People argue about this number constantly. Some say it's catastrophic. Others say it doesn't matter. Most people just feel vaguely anxious when they hear it. But nobody actually understands it, because nobody can. Here's an attempt. If you earned $50,000 a year, which is close to the median individual income in the US, and you wanted to pay off $36 trillion, it would take you 720 million years. That's 5,000 times longer than modern humans have existed. You would need to start before the dinosaurs went extinct, and you still wouldn't be done. But your brain hears 36 trillion, and it just files it in the same mental folder as mortgage or car loan. Big debt. Concerning? Maybe. But conceptually similar. It's not. Not even close. And because you can't feel the difference, you can't make informed decisions about it. So instead, you pick a team. You trust someone who sounds confident. You go with your gut. But your gut was designed to choose between 4 berries and 7 berries, not trillions. A company announces record profits, $6 billion this quarter. Sounds great, right? Successful company. Strong economy. Good for shareholders. Then you find out they laid off 8,000 employees to get there. Your brain rebels. How can a company making $6 billion need to fire 8,000 people? Here's how. Those 8,000 employees, let's say they make an average of $60,000 a year. That's $480 million in annual payroll. Cutting them saves the company $480 million, which increases the $6 billion to $6,480 million, an 8% increase in profit. And to a CEO whose compensation is tied to quarterly profit margins, 8% is the difference between a good year and a great year. It's the difference between a $5 million bonus and a $12 million bonus. But to you, the person reading the headline, $6 billion and $6,480 million are the same number. They're both huge profit. So the decision seems cruel and unnecessary. But from inside the logarithmic brain of someone whose wealth is measured in tens of millions, it's obvious, it's rational, it's barely even a choice. And you can't see it their way, because you're not built to. Every week, millions of people buy lottery tickets. The odds of winning the Powerball jackpot are 1 in 292 million. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning. Twice, in the same day. But people play anyway, because when the jackpot hits $800 million, it feels real. It feels possible. Here's the trick though. The difference between a $50 million jackpot and an $800 million jackpot is $750 million. That's not a small difference. That's a civilization-changing amount of money. But it doesn't change the odds, not even a little, and it shouldn't change your decision to play. Because if 50 million wouldn't change your life enough to justify a 1 in 292 million shot, neither should 800 million. Both are more money than you could ever need. Both are functionally infinite wealth for a normal person. But your brain doesn't see that. It sees 800 million as way bigger than 50 million. Even though both are past the point of comprehension, both are in the zone where numbers stop meaning anything. So you play when the jackpot is high. And the lottery knows that. They've built their entire business model around the fact that you can't process large numbers. Here's a thought experiment. I offer you two choices. Option 1, I give you $1 million right now. Cash, yours, tax-free. Option 2, I give you 1 penny today, 2 pennies tomorrow, 4 pennies the day after. Every day for 30 days, I double the amount. Which do you take? If you're like most people, you take the million. Because $1 million is a life-changing amount of money, and a penny doubled for a month sounds like a novelty. But let's do the math. Day 1, 1 cent. Day 10, $5.12. Day 20, $5,242. Day 30, $5,372,853. You just lost $4 million because your brain can't process exponential growth. And this isn't a trick. This is how compound interest works. This is how wealth grows. This is how debt spirals. But you can't see it because the early days don't feel meaningful. A penny, 2 cents, it's nothing. By the time the numbers get big enough to feel real, it's too late to adjust your strategy. And every credit card company, every payday lender, every adjustable rate mortgage broker knows this about you. Let's get uncomfortable. When a politician says we need to cut $100 million from the education budget to reduce the deficit, it sounds responsible. We need to make tough choices. We can't keep spending money we don't have. 100 million. That's real money. That's serious. But the deficit is measured in trillions. Cutting 100 million from a $1 trillion deficit is like removing 1 grain of sand from a beach and calling it erosion control. It does nothing, but your brain can't see that. Because 100 million and 1 trillion both live in the impossibly big part of your brain. So the cut feels meaningful. It feels like sacrifice. It feels like progress. Meanwhile, the same politician approves a $2 billion subsidy for an industry that donated to their campaign. $2 billion is 20 times larger than 100 million, but it gets reported the same way. Billions in spending, millions in cuts. Your brain processes them as equivalent. And democracy, the thing that's supposed to keep this in check, runs on your ability to tell the difference. But you can't. There's a study from a few years ago that still haunts me. Researchers asked Americans to estimate the wealth distribution in the country. Then they asked what they thought the ideal distribution should be. Then they showed them the actual distribution. Most people thought the richest 20% held about 60% of the wealth. They said the ideal would be closer to 30%. The reality? The richest 20% hold 89% of the wealth, and the richest 1% hold 32%. But here's the thing that should terrify you. When people saw the real numbers, most didn't believe them. Not because they were skeptical of the data, but because their brains literally could not process what 89% of all wealth concentrated in 20% of the population actually means. It's too big, too abstract, too far outside the range of numbers that feel real. So instead of outrage, there's confusion. Instead of action, there's doubt. And the system continues exactly as it was. You pay $150 a month for health insurance. That's $1,800 a year. Feels like a lot, right? It is a lot. For most people, that's a real chunk of their budget. Now, your insurance company denies a claim for a medical procedure that costs $30,000. You're angry, you appeal. You fight, but here's what's happening on the other side. Your insurance company processes 20 million claims a year. If they deny just 5% of them, even temporarily, even for procedures they eventually approve, they hold on to billions of dollars longer. And that money, sitting in their accounts for an extra 60 days while you appeal, earns them millions in interest. Your $30,000 claim is invisible to them. But your $150 monthly premium, multiplied by millions of people, is their entire business model. You're focused on the big number, the scary number, the 30,000. They're focused on the small number, the monthly payment, the steady income. And because you can't process how $150 times millions of people times 12 months becomes tens of billions, you don't see the game. You just see a company being cruel about your specific case. But it's not about you. It's about math your brain can't hold. Imagine 2 kids, both born in the same year, same city, same hospital even. Kid 1's parents have a net worth of $80,000. Kid 2's parents have a net worth of $8 million. Your brain sees those two families as different, sure. One is working class, one is wealthy. But let's project forward. Kid 1 grows up in a decent school district, goes to a state college with some loans, gets a job making 50 grand, works their way up to 80,000 by 40, retires at 65 with about 400,000 in savings if they're disciplined. Good life. Comfortable, dignified. Kid 2 grows up in a private school, goes to an elite college with no loans, plus a car, plus an apartment, plus a networking fund, gets an entry-level job at a friend's parents' company making 90,000, inherits $2 million at 30 when a grandparent dies, buys property, invests, never worries about money, retires at 65 with 12 million, minimum. The difference between 400,000 and 12 million is not a difference your brain can feel. But it's the difference between Kid 1's grandchildren working for a living and Kid 2's grandchildren never having to. It's the difference between generational progress and generational dynasties. And it all started with a gap your brain processed as working class versus wealthy, when it should have been different species of human experience. Apple is worth $3 trillion. Microsoft is worth $3 trillion. Nvidia is worth $3 trillion. When you hear that, you think, okay, big tech companies. Valuable. But let's break it down. $3 trillion is more than the entire GDP of India. India, a country of 1,400,000,000 people. Apple, a company that makes phones and laptops, is worth more than the total economic output of 1/5 of all humans on Earth. But your brain doesn't rebel against that. It doesn't short-circuit. It just files it under big successful company. Because 3 trillion and 1 trillion and 500 billion all get processed the same way, more than I can imagine. Which means you have no framework for understanding what it means when 5 companies control that much value. No framework for questioning it. No framework for even noticing it's strange. You spend 3 hours a day on social media. That's 1095 hours a year. Feels like a lot when you say it that way. But the company you're scrolling on, let's say it's Meta, made $117 billion in revenue last year. Most of that from ads. Ads targeted at you, based on data collected from you. Now here's the question. How much is your attention worth? Meta has 3 billion users, 117 billion in revenue. That's about $39 per user per year. $39. That's what your attention, your data, your time is worth to them. But you spend 3 hours a day giving it away. 3 hours a day, every day, for $39 a year. If you worked a minimum wage job for those 3 hours, you'd make about $15,000 a year. But $39 sounds like nothing. And $15,000 sounds like something. So you keep scrolling, because your brain can't process the value of your own time at scale. Let's step back. Everything I've just described, every example, every trap, every illusion, it all comes back to one thing. Your brain can't feel large numbers. And modern life is built entirely out of large numbers. Wealth is measured in millions and billions. Debt is measured in trillions. Companies are valued in trillions. Populations are counted in billions. Time is sold in hours that compound into lifetimes. And you, standing in the middle of all this, with a brain that maxes out somewhere around 10,000, you're expected to make rational decisions. You're expected to vote on budgets you can't comprehend. You're expected to save for retirement with compound interest you can't visualize. You're expected to understand inequality you can't feel. You're expected to evaluate risk in a system where all the numbers are too big to mean anything. And when you can't, when you make mistakes, when you choose badly, the system doesn't bend to help you. It extracts from you. Here's what this cost you personally. You underestimate how much you need to retire because the numbers don't feel real. You undervalue your time because hours don't compound in your mind the way they do in reality. You don't demand accountability for trillion-dollar decisions because you can't tell the difference between a billion and a trillion. You accept inequality you'd revolt against if you could actually see it. You trust systems that exploit the fact that you enumerate past a certain threshold, and the gap between what you think you understand and what's actually happening grows wider every year. Because the numbers keep getting bigger, and your brain doesn't. So here's where we are. You live in a world designed for brains that can process numbers, yours can't. Every financial system, every political structure, every corporate decision, every economic policy, it all assumes you can tell the difference between millions and billions and trillions. But not really, not in a way that matters. And the people who benefit from that gap, they're not going to fix it. They're not going to simplify the numbers. They're not going to make wealth inequality visible. They're not going to stop using scales that confuse you, because your confusion is profitable. So the question isn't whether your brain can learn to process big numbers. It probably can't. Not without tools, not without systems, not without constant effort. The question is whether you're going to keep pretending you can, or whether you're going to start demanding a world built for the brain you actually have. Because right now, you're living in someone else's math, and you can't even see the equation.